Hello and welcome, Neko AV here with another video. And there's a question when it comes to the whole thing of music and beauty, at least with my analysis, that I would have to question of, am I right in what I'm saying or could I be wrong? Because like I said, I make a reference to Cube and like a cube can be great, and with the minimalism, a cube does not need to be decorated like I decorated my cube in this pixel art image decades ago. I think I'd made this one in 2004, maybe 2005. I might be getting the dates mixed up. But yeah, this is no pixel art image of mine. And rather than just sticking to a basic cube, this was based on a weird dream I've had. And yeah, I added to it because of what was in the dream, being in one room and then the other room, and then seeing the rooms merge and a cube on a table with a reflection of the room. And then I just put like the transition point, and for some reason it was this weird face, and so I tried to recreate the face the best that I can in the cube. The chess pieces are the only thing that wasn't part of the dream. I just figured that was just a nice creative touch while I'm awake. But yeah, a cube does not need to be decorated like this. A cube can be beautiful by itself with how like the reflections are drawn and the different angles. Even if it's imperfect and not exactly a cube per se, it can still be an interesting shape, can get you to imagine like what could be on the other side of this image. Though I already said what it is with my image, because like I said, one side's supposed to reflect the other and stuff like that. So now the thing that got me into talking about this, one of the things that I didn't really talk enough of was in relation to Venus Theory, what he said of the playlistification of music. And I know I don't have an image up of that. I do have other images that's going to be shown. Venus Theory talked about the bar gig problem, in which case not everyone's going to a bar to listen to the music or the live band perform or whatever. Some people are there just to have a drink, just to eat wings or whatever the food is, and some people are there just to socialize. And even then, there's no guarantee that the people going there would even enjoy the music that's present. And this has led me to one of the more recent videos by Andy Edwards. And gotta set this up here. A little bit of background thing, which is gonna be very important as the video goes on. But yeah, are you too stupid to appreciate good music? And that is an interesting thought, because with the whole thing of basic stuff, is it foolish for someone to just like the basic stuff, like with Sabrina Carpenter's Man-Child? Is it bad for someone just enjoy the vibe of the basic background stuff? Does it need to be intricate? And the answer is no. If people just want to vibe, just like how some people may just want to vibe at a bar, I mean, is it a bad thing? No, most certainly not. And sure, as much as what Andy Edwards said in his video, you can enjoy other stuff. Like, you can learn to understand the intricacies and maybe develop an appreciation, but at the same time, it's also a matter of whether or not you want to do that. Not everyone's going to want to do that, much like with what Venus Theory said about the bar gig problem. You don't have to enjoy the live band performing if you don't want to, if it's not your taste. And that's an interesting thing. It's something that I should have went into talking about, but I'm at least talking about this here, and I think I got a better idea of it. But it isn't just the only thing. There's also another thing that in one of Andy Edwards' more recent videos after this one, in which case he also talked about how critics can shape our view of music. He went in to talk about that in a few of his, when he get a bit ranty, and I honestly don't blame him. Like, I'm not a big fan of what a lot of the critics say either, and have even questioned if the critics are any different from the curators that Venus Theory speaks of. which I've already gone into in my previous videos. So yeah, there's that. But there's also other stuff which is gonna have me go into the other things I'm gonna reference. Starting off with this one. Ashley Embers. Remember when people used to be interesting? Now this I would have went into thinking, okay, this is just like what Tentacruel was talking about that I previously referenced when Tentacruel was talking about the book Dialect of Enlightenment and the introversion of sacrifice. And while yeah, a lot of the introversion of sacrifice does apply, and what I think of, which is the whole thing of how this builds into cringe culture, people looking at something that's too cringe, and so people cage themselves in their interests, keeping their interests hidden from others. But at the same time, criticism can also go into this. But of course, so there is a question of, is this a bad thing? Because there are some people who would say that, no, this is a good thing, this is very helpful. And yeah, you don't need to know what someone's personal interest is. If someone actually enjoys 50 Shades of Grey, you don't need to know that's someone's favorite book. I already talked about one of my favorite books in a previous video when I talked about The Running Man. And if anyone who would see this video and wonder, yeah, I do plan to see the new Running Man movie. I'll probably talk about that in another video at another point. But that's besides the point. But yeah, this screenshot in particular I want to get into, which helps to talk about, which gets to the point of what Ashley Embers was talking about with, I think it says Embers. I might be reading that wrong. But yeah, this quote from Tim Wu in praise of mediocrity. There's a deeper reason. I've come to think that, okay, well, you can already read it there. About the whole thing of people having hobbies and other interests outside of life, and how there's this expectation of being professional. And yeah, I do think that is a negative thing. Why are there people who don't seem to have hobbies anymore, or their hobbies involve just working on stuff? Because you have this thing that do push people into these bubbles. In a strange way, it also relates to what I said in my 3 a.m. and Lonely video as well, of how there's this problem that had caused people to become more isolated. And not because of adult material, but usually stuff that leaves people feeling isolated because they close themselves off to what is publicly acceptable, what may be considered a societal norm, when maybe it's not as normal as we think. I have often argued that a lot of this behavior does come off as unnatural because we are a social species and we should be communicating. That's what the internet is supposed to be for. Unfortunately, people use the internet to do mindless critique and stuff like that, and a lot of us tend to find ourselves doing even more introversion of sacrifice. Obviously, I'm not doing that. I could have easily went into the whole introversion of sacrificing by just standing in front of a camera, plain black shirt, plain black pants, and then be like, well, here's my opinion. And it's like, yeah, but am I actually practicing what I preach, so to say? That's why I use a virtual avatar, as I said in previous videos. It's a visual representation of my interests. But there's a lot more than that. Now, there are people who have taken their hobbies and interests and go even further. And I make point to reference Josh Scorcher. He was in the Marine Corps band. And now he does videos based on his interests, which includes music, animation, and video games. And I figure like his latest video on Great Villain Songs is a good video that represents his interests. So there is that. And then there's Gaijin Goomba, who's more known for like talking about culture and society. He talks a bit about American culture, talks about Japanese culture, talks about anime, ninjas, video games. But then he went a shift to talking about Warhammer 40k, and he is someone who enjoys the orc factions. So he talks about that, and as well as some things that he takes from the whole thing of with the orc faction, not just why he likes them, but also like the philosophy behind and trying to apply that to life, including something that he learned from his grandfather, which was an interesting thing. Good video to watch. I would strongly encourage you to watch it. But yeah, you got people who take their interests and they do make a career out of it, but it's because it's also an expression of their genuine selves. Much like how what you're seeing, what I presented at the start of the video, is a genuine interest of myself. What people want to glean from my dream that inspired the pixel art background would be fun to see, because I still don't understand the dream itself. But yeah, this is the means of self-expression. And I have often said, like, which also relates again to Ashley and the point she's getting at, not just a lack of hobbies, but also a fear of expression, which again is a reference, which again I referenced Tantacruel for, and of course the book Dialect of Enlightenment, which again I would not have understand the whole thing of introversion of sacrifice if not for Tantacruel, given his take. But lastly, there's one other thing. Because I talked a little bit about criticism and the problem of criticism. And there were two people who had said some interesting comments about it. I got Leanna K, The Criticism Spiral, and Marco Meeple, Critique is Killing Video Games. And I'm going to be honest, it's still hard for me to fully grasp what they're talking about, because like Leanna has a specific definition of criticism that she follows. Marco has a specific definition of criticism that he follows, and I also have a specific definition of criticism I follow. And while the three of us seem to have completely different views on what criticism is, which I think probably makes this all very difficult for me to understand. At the same time, looking at all of this, and even including like what Andy Edwards talked about, and of course what Ashley talked about, and Gaijin Goomba, and I don't know if Josh Gorcher has spoke of this, but I would be interested to hear what Josh's take on this would be. But yeah, there's this whole thing of not so much people criticizing, but people using criticism as a means to discourage. They talk about stuff that's discouraging rather than giving feedback. And that is the thing that a lot of people do need. People need feedback. But at the same time, it needs to be proper feedback. It isn't just, oh, this is bad because blah, blah, blah. Especially since, as I pointed out when referencing Venus Theory, you just may not be interested. It may not be your thing. And sometimes people tend to argue more in favor of their personal aesthetic rather than what actually needs to be said. And so it comes to the question of, when it comes to criticism, like, are people talking about what can actually improve an artist or whatever? Or are they just talking more to reinforce their own personal aesthetic? Which is where the whole thing of criticism gets complicated. But there's no doubt that there is a problem with this, which is that the constant and even unnecessary criticism is having a negative effect on beauty. And with this negative effect on beauty, and as I said, I'm not talking about vanity, I'm talking about stuff like self-expression, we end up suppressing others. Of course, it may not be us that's doing the suppression. It may be others that push for the self-suppression, the introversion of sacrifice. Now, does this mean that the basic stuff's bad? No, it's just a different taste. So with that said, I'm Neko AV, and I thank you for watching.